Silence. Quiet. Keep your voice down. Because today we're talking about the Quakers. And they really like silence. Shh. Be respectful.
Hold on, I'm gonna kill a fly. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another thrilling episode of Atheist Church Audit. I shouldn't call it thrilling today because today might be the most, still unexciting a church that I've ever been to. But it was really good and I'm excited to talk about it. If you're new here, and I presume that you're not, my name is Jared and I'm an atheist and I like church hopping. I go to different religious communities pretty much every week and try to explore them, investigate them, blah, 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 blah. I try not to do a ton of research beforehand because I think it's more fun when you just go not knowing what's going to happen and you embrace it. That being said, today for this audit, I did want to do a little bit of research on the origins of Quakerism because I know that it's a very old, very historical denomination and I wanted to be able to better appreciate its roots. So I've done a tiny bit of Googling and I'm still gonna get stuff wrong. Please correct me gently. But given what little I've read, I'm gonna try to give an overarching view of what Quakerism is and how that played out in today's service. But before I do that, I first need to apologize for this thumbnail because presumably it has the Quaker Oats guy in it somewhere. And it kind of sucks because Quaker Oats has nothing to do with Quakerism.
Quaker Oats. It's the right thing to do.
I'm not usually the guy to, go on about cultural appropriation, but literally at the start of the Quaker Oats company, they just like yoinked him as a mascot and they were like, oh, Quakers, they seem trustworthy. Imagine today that like they made a cereal that was called like Ortho O's. And it's like, no, it's made by, agnostics in Portland, but it's just, taking their image and likeness and profiting off of it. So let's dive into it. Quakerism was founded in the 17th century by George Fox. George Fox was located in England, and largely he came on the scene and began preaching as the Church of England was kind of going through a little bit of a shuffle. They were collapsing. He was preaching in the middle of an English Civil War, and George Fox emphasized a direct experience that is possible to be had with God, apart from sacraments, apart from church hierarchy, apart from priests, bishops, any of that jazz. He stressed this concept of inner light, quote unquote, this divine light that exists within every person, and he was radically egalitarian, so he rejected any sort of hierarchy, period, including hierarchies between men and women. So in his services, women were just as allowed and free to speak as men were. Historically, they have been wildly pacifistic to the extent that that's been their major point of persecution. Similar to Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't take oaths or vows or creeds. And then interestingly, they don't have a formal set of doctrines from what I understand. So fascinatingly, they don't call each other believers in the way that most other Christians do when referring to Christians. They call each other friends. And so the official name of Quakers is kind of a shorthand, but their official name is the Religious Society of Friends. And the term Quaker probably had a couple of different origins. There's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or legit, but allegedly George Fox got in like a heated altercation with a judge, and he pointed his finger at the judge and like gave him divine altercations and told him to tremble in fear before the Lord. And the judge's retort was like, bro, you're the Quaker. But then also there were a lot of early reports of Quakers trembling under divine conviction, trembling in the fear of the Lord. And so that idea of Quakers quaking with kind of religious ecstasy or religious fervor, that caught on. It was originally an insult that they, took as label of pride eventually, just like the term Methodist, just like the term Anabaptist, and even just like the term Christian. Oh, and queer. That's another one. Quakers today have a very rich history behind them of largely social activism and social justice, mixed with this intense divine religious fervor. And Quaker churches, called meeting houses because they would say they are the church, are some of the most quirky and unique religious ceremonies that I've ever seen. Broadly speaking, there's two types of Quakers from what I understand. There are unprogrammed Quakers and programmed Quakers. I went to an unprogrammed Quaker meeting house today. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But for starters, it means that these people tend to be more left-leaning. This was a meeting house out in Durham, and kind of one of the consistent themes that I've seen with all of the churches or religious organizations that I've visited in Durham, incredibly social justice oriented. They've got the rainbow flags outside, they've got a Black Lives Matter sign sticking up in the yard, and that's just a consistent theme of that area. And I will say that also with these churches, they feel more homely. The thing that I'm often complaining about with a lot of the church buildings that I attend, or a lot of the churches that I attend, is that it feels kind of like quaint, but not very familial. And I will say that, like, just from the get-go, this felt much more familial. It felt warmer. There's a cute little like mural for the kids. There's like more people congregating and like drinking coffee together before the service. So then you go inside to, I don't know if they'd call it a sanctuary. I'm gonna call it a sanctuary. You go inside to the sanctuary and there's something noticeably missing from this sanctuary. And that is, there's no pulpit. There is no podium. There is nothing where a speaker should stand. And this is always fascinating to me. The orientation of the chairs in any religious community signify what is important to that community. In Islamic prayer services, all of the prayers are facing towards the east because that's a big deal in their theology, facing towards Mecca. In a lot of Baptist and evangelical circles, you'll have the chairs kind of wrapped around the preacher because the preacher is front and center and he's going to bring the word of God and the message is the center. In a lot of Pentecostal services, you'll have like kind of like more wiggle room at the front of the altar because people are going to come up there and they're going to pray and dance and sing and do all their hoopla. And then here today in the meeting house, the chairs are in a big square. It's a big circle facing each other, facing no one. And that's because it's an echo of their theology that they don't have pastors. They don't have elders. I don't think. They don't have bishops or priests. They just are all on equal footing, entirely egalitarian, and that is their service. There is no reading. There is nothing except what everyone there brings to the table. So that unprogrammed portion that I mentioned earlier, that's what this is referring to. There's no program. There's no method to any of this. I think that's what that's referring to. Still a noob, doesn't know what he's talking about. Keep that in mind. So then, dear viewer, dear interlocutor, I bet you're wondering, what do you do during the service? Nothing.
Oh, there, black and white, you get nothing.
Silence is a huge thing in Quakerism. There is a huge emphasis on simplicity and peaceful living, and beyond all of that, a silent and quiet meditation on God. And it is very beautiful. So the structure of today's service, you walk in there, there's about 30 people sitting on normal chairs. There's no icons, there's no crosses, there's no Bible verses, there's no announcements. Everyone walks in, they sit down, and they are silent for an hour. And I say this all the time to go to church, but I really think that this is one of those things that's very much worth experiencing. It is fascinating just going and sitting and being silent. And blah, 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 we live in a noisy age, like all of that crap. But I mean, that's real. Like I woke up at 6 a.m. this morning and, rolled out of bed and, was reading emails. And it's like, from the moment that I wake up, I'm on. And that's not natural. It's not healthy. And I don't mean to just regurgitate every Jonathan Haidt talking point ever, but you're too distracted. You have too many notifications that are constantly pinging and distracting you and tearing your attention away. It is a rare and unique thing to sit in a room full of people and not say a word. You sit and you meditate and you look around the room and you hear the cicadas droning in the distance. And it's really beautiful. So the silence is the bread and butter of the service. It is the backbone of this whole thing. However, it is not, strictly speaking, the only thing that happens, because the idea is that we are silent until the Lord speaks. If God wants to communicate something to this group of friends, he will use one of these friends, and he will prompt them. He will give them a word or a song or a poem or something to share with the group. And so I think that the way they understand it is that the divine light that is within them, it comes to the fore and they share that revelation with the group. And so truthfully, like I said, I woke up at 6. It was an early morning. I was sitting and appreciating the silence and taking it all in, but I'm human. And so it was about 50 minutes in that I started slowly kind of doing one of these. And right as I started to fall asleep a little bit, somebody across the room spoke up, and it jerked me awake. And so a woman on the other side of the room, a woman in her 60s, stood up and kind of shared what was on her heart. And essentially she gave like a little 2-minute injunction. I don't know what you would call it. Basically saying that her heart was very heavy because of the recent ICE raids, and she was concerned, and she was imploring everyone to think and meditate on how they can be better neighbors during this tumultuous time. And if you're a conservative hearing that and your knee-jerk reaction is to roll your eyes, I hope that you can hear in sincerity that woman was scared on behalf of people, and that love and compassion should not be belittled or looked down upon. I mean, this is pretty fringe, I hope. I've heard some conservative Christians make mention of toxic empathy, and that's bullshit. There is no such thing. You cannot love somebody too much. That woman sat down, and then there was a little bit more silence, and then it was over. Then, man, I forget what they called it, but it was basically like they opened the floor for like highs and lows, flowers and thorns. Like it's a very common thing in religious circles. Just like, hey, what's one thing wonderful that's happened to you this week? What's one thing shitty that's happened to you this week? Somebody stood up and said, like, I'm grateful that I got to see my mom, but my heart's heavy this week because I'm remembering the anniversary of the death of my friend. It was just very human and good. Then there were a couple of announcements, and that was it. It was like very short and not a whole lot happened, but it will be one of the most memorable services that I've ever had. Like, I will remember this for years. After the service, I spoke briefly to one of the women there named Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Hope you're thriving. And she was giving me a little bit of the history of that meeting house. And I didn't know this. Apparently, like, North Carolina is a hub for Quakers and Quakerism, and it has one of the largest diversities of Quaker thought and practice. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, when I was a kid, I went to a Quaker summer camp, and I didn't ever get like a pitch for like what Quakerism was. I just associated it with like, oh yeah, it's the pacifist branch of Christianity. But now that I'm older, I'm like, man, what was Quaker about that whole thing? It was just a good summer camp. So historical Quakerism in its heyday would have been much more contemplative of God and Christ and the scriptures during these silent portions. And you can imagine that when somebody felt prompted by the Spirit or by this inner light, they would more likely get up, and rather than share something about what's going on in the community or something about politics, they would get up and say, I feel Christ compelling us and admonishing us to love one another more fervently because Christ is coming back soon. Or they would say, I feel the compulsion from the Lord to remind us all about the story in 1 Samuel or whatever. The movement, the religious movement, has gone in a different direction since then. And I think it's progressed into something beautiful. It's just different. It's different than the thing that I was anticipating today. I think that I was actually really looking forward to this. And I think I was a little disappointed. Not because the church, the meeting house, was bad. Largely, as I mentioned, Quakerism has become a pretty progressive sect of Christianity. It's very liberal now, by and large. There's a few conservative like splinter groups that I'm excited to explore someday. But by and large, this is probably more indicative of the average Quaker ethos. It's not doctrine oriented, it's social justice oriented. It's not biblically oriented, it is spiritually oriented. And when they say that anyone is welcome here, they mean it. You can be an atheist, you can be agnostic, you can be Buddhist, you can be like whatever. The phrase spiritual but not religious, this is that on steroids. And that tends to not be my flavor, just being transparent. But I can see that it meant a lot to these people and it was really good for them. The people were friendly and like super down to earth. And I think that those people were experiencing the same thing that I was, just a break from the insane noise of everything. And it gave them a moment to pause and ponder their community, ponder the people they love, ponder how grateful they should be that God or the universe or whoever the hell woke them up that morning. And I think it's wildly important and really, really good. But it wasn't the thing that I was anticipating this morning. As I was just doing a tiny bit of reading, again, noob, don't know much, I was kind of like taken aback by Quakerism and by the quietistic Christians of the 17th century. And it really seemed like, oh man, there's a through line here between them and my spiritual heritage as a young Pentecostal. And there is almost certainly a through line between Pentecostals and their predecessors, the Quakers. Because like, when I was a Pentecostal, I was never really into the vibe of the whole, like, you know, dudes in three-piece suits, you know, shouting and hollering and stomping and doing laps around the church. That was just never really my vibe or flavor. On the other hand, though, I was in the Christian metal scene, and you could probably argue that thrashing around in a For Today mosh pit and being a Church of God pastor in a three-piece suit doing laps around the church might be the same thing, just in different fonts. But the core of my spiritual heritage felt like probably what Quakerism began as rather than what it has eventually morphed into. Because it sounds like the original Quakers and George Fox, it was very Christocentric. And the quietness and the silence was focused on trying to meditate on God and, you know, the divine light that they're talking about, or that inner light that they're talking about. It seems like it's reaching towards God rather than towards your neighbor. So I've mentioned recently that the silence is often one of my favorite portions of a good religious service. I love the silent portions of the Salat in the masjid. I love the silent moments that I've been in Eastern Orthodox settings. And I've even loved the quiet times that I've had with my Christian Science friends. And I think in all of those settings and in others, the thing that I like is that it feels like it's a moment to reflect on something higher. Certainly to different degrees, depending on the denomination and the people and blah, blah, blah. But I think when it's reaching for something higher, that's when it feels holy. It feels pregnant. When I was a kid, specifically in high school, it was my daily routine to wake up at 5 a.m. before going to high school. And I would just sit in my bedroom. Nobody forced me, nobody made me, nobody told me that this is what I needed to do to please God or to get into heaven. I just loved worship and adoration. And so every morning before school, I would wake up at 5 a.m. and spend an hour going back and forth between reading scripture and dancing around my bedroom and praying earnestly and just being silent. And there was a little bit of a mystic in me, you know, trying to meditate on the divine logos. There were days that I would like walk into school and it felt like I had an afterglow, you know? There was this pensive reaching for something beyond, something higher. And in what little I've read, you know, about early Quakerism and George Fox, it sounds like there was a strand of that in there. And I was hoping to find that today. And I felt like I got bait and switched almost. What I found today was profoundly beautiful, and it was really, really cool to watch and witness and be a part of. But if I can be so judgmental, it felt solemn but not sacred. And I'm glad that there's a community of people here who are profoundly interested in bettering the lives of their neighbors and friends and relatives. But that's not primarily what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in the handful of people who feel like they've touched God. I don't believe in any of it, but it's still a profound thing to talk to somebody who's done something like that, who's been that type of person. I think maybe I was excited to see other people who had that same disposition or hunger that I did as a young and zealous high schooler. But again, I want to give these people kudos because, out of all of the churches that I've been to, this one probably produces the least amount of toxicity. I think apples to apples, the Quakers maybe have like the least amount of scandals of any church ever. And they are supremely interested in service and bettering their communities and loving people. And I think that all of that is really commendable. Today was a good day. And who knows, maybe I'll go explore another Quaker community in the coming months or years. Life is long, who knows. With all that being said, nothing but kind words for this lovely community that I was thrilled to get to hang out with today. So, my name is Jared. I'm an atheist. Go to church. And shut up for once in your life.